Wonderful day, and this is a great final panel. It's my privilege to moderate. And I want to start with our partners from the Center for Humane Technology, and Tristan, I want to ask you in some ways a very personal question, because today it was mentioned on the last panel that today has been exceptionally hopeful, more hopeful than these gatherings oftentimes tend to be. And my predecessor and the founder of Search for Common Ground, one of the core insights that led him to leave his very adversarial advocacy lifetime commitment to establish this organization, Search for Common Ground, 41 years ago, was the insight that tearing down the old system is not the same thing as building the new one. And you have been at the forefront of raising alarms for all of us, and I think everybody feels quite grateful to you for being one of those primary voices. How do you balance the alarming awareness of the scope of the challenge and the dangers that we're facing with the hope that you need to maintain in order to do something about them, even if you don't see the pathway yet for growing the constructive approach to the kind of scale that it needs to be?
Can you all hear me? Yeah. Yeah, it is it's a very, very good question. I'm sure that many people here in the room, especially if you work on these topics and you look at the conflicts that are happening around the world and you have to do the queries or stare at the stuff that's going most viral, you're basically looking at the darkest, what's it called, Black Mirror? You're looking at the Black Mirror of society by doing that work. And I remember talking to Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, because she worked on the trust and safety teams, and every couple of weeks they had to look at the top 100 or top 50 or something posts that were going viral in especially the most at-risk countries. And the way that affects your psyche to have to look at that every day is very, very difficult. And so I want to first have everybody honor just that is hard, and I honor that everybody here is doing that work, and that I hope you all have the support and care structures and support structures in your lives that you can continue to do it, because for me, to answer your question, for me personally, I remember in about 2013 when thinking about the attention economy, and just the scale of this stuff is so hard to kind of be with, right? Because you're looking at how 1 billion people are going to be pulled by this new invisible gravitational force towards a more addicted, outraged, polarized, narcissistic, attention-seeking, conflict-driven society, because those are all adjectives that describe a success case of an engagement-based paradigm. And seeing that, and then feeling like there's this tilt, as we said in Social Dilemma, there's like, you tilt the floor of humanity. You can always walk the other way, but if I set the gravitational pull just like 5 degrees, even Jaron Lanier said in the Social Dilemma, if you move the world by 1%, that's the whole world by 1% is a lot. I mean, climate change is 1 degree, or 2 degrees, and that can really affect the whole world. And so, to go back to your question, and there's so much to say about this, but in 2013, I remember having a conversation with some people who were in the climate movement, and this was kind of the early climate change of culture that we were talking about with regard to how social media was going to affect society. And I remember there was this moment in the phone call with this climate activist where he was like, "You are on a very long journey ahead. And I hope you're prepared, because you're probably going to spend the next 5 to 7 years just sounding the alarm before you even get to a world that actually starts to look better." And that is really, really hard, especially when you know the danger of where this stuff goes. So I just want to first say that the kind of patience that it takes for all of us when you're seeing how these problems are affecting the world, that is a difficult thing to hold. But I will say there has never been more momentum than ever, truly, in this whole space and in this movement. From, the organizations that have sprouted, what Integrity Institute is doing, the fact that there are more proposals, there's more New Public. I mean, we can name all the organizations. I'm not going to do the thing where I have to tag everybody. But, the fact that there's a design patterns library, pro-social designs, where we're going to catalog, right, what are the best possible design answers. One of the things is people can't imagine a different reality than how are you going to create that different reality? And we've been so focused on waking people up to the bad reality that we have to actually show and imagine that alternative. And so I'm so excited, honestly, that the people in this room have been hopefully sharing the seeds of those ideas that will lead to that different adjacent reality. The Buckminster Fuller quote is that you don't try to change the existing reality, you build a new world that makes the old one obsolete. And it's a beautiful quote, but I do remember that there's a lot of lock-in effects on the current paradigm, right? And because the network effects of, if you're a teenager and you're 22 years old and you go to a certain college, you don't exist if you don't have an Instagram account. I have another friend at another university, and she doesn't exist if she's not on Snapchat. She doesn't want to use Snapchat. But when social existence has been colonized by the network effect of these companies that say you have to use these systems to participate in society, that's a real problem. But just to finish on the optimism part, because I'm kind of wheeling around a little bit here. I just want to, so there's this there's a couple last things I'll quickly share. I don't mean to take up so much time. It's an important framework called pre-tragic, tragic, and post-tragic. Pre-tragic is when you live in the naive dream that everything's okay. You haven't really metabolized that there's kind of a crisis that we're in. And I'm sure each of us can remember the times in our lives when we were kind of pre-understanding this kind of crisis. Maybe you thought social media was fine, or maybe you thought the environment was okay. And that's pre-tragic, so it's kind of the naive. Then there's tragic, where you actually metabolize and see the crises that we actually face. And usually one of two things happen. You either go into denial, and you go into denial and you become cynical and kind of depressed about that, or you revert back into the naive pre-tragic, because that's just a more healthy, clean place to be. But if you can truly metabolize where we are, and the network effect problem and the fact that if you're 22, you have to be on these platforms, the more you can metabolize the actual reality that we're in, you could land in a place called post-tragic, where you're still optimistic, but you're optimistic from an honest place of seeing the forces that are acting against the world that we want to create. And I think it's really important that all of us have the support structures to get to post-tragic. It's taken me a while. It's taken a lot of therapy, a lot of support, a lot of crying. You have to let this stuff run through you. So I just encourage all of you to do that. And just to close up on the optimism, Frances Haugen launched a whole new wave of impact into this whole space. We have 10,000 pages of documents validating what many people have been saying for a long time. We now have the proof. We have the FTC, going after companies for design patterns for the first time. For those who don't know, the Federal Trade Commission just about a month ago, month and a half ago, filed a $500 million fine against Fortnite for a design feature. They've never done that before, design feature in a tech product. That sets a precedent that now the FTC can go after tech companies for bad design features. So how do we create a social consensus of what bad design is so the FTC can act on more of that, right? Apple is now engaged in this issue, and they implemented these screen time features that I know, this tiny little thing that no one, that people mostly ignore on their phone. But Apple could implement new design codes and standards, just like we have building codes for buildings, and the Civic Signals and New Public guys are here. We have building codes for what are safe buildings. We can have safe design codes for Humane Technology. This could be built into the ways that app stores work, so that if you're putting your app into an app store, it can be forced to work that way. So I don't mean to take so much time, but there's a wide set of things that I want to say are happening. A lot more is happening, and you just have to wait for those developments to keep going. And you might have to wait 6 years on just the problem-raising side before now you start to get to there's more movement than ever. So,
thank you. Thank you for going there. And I actually want to pick up on the very first thing you actually said, which is hoping that we all have these networks. And I think one of the things that we're hoping with this council is that there are two sets of communities that actually haven't had a whole lot of overlap between them, that are each facing extraordinary challenges with a shared concern about them. And I hope this community can form and create some of that support for one another. Deepanjalie, I want to come to you. So you lead one of the most prominent and respected think tanks in South Asia on these issues. And picking up on Tristan's point of the pre-tragic and the tragic and getting to the post-tragic, unfortunately, your country also, Sri Lanka, is one of the case studies of the offline damage that can be done from online harms. Can you share an insight or two from the research that Verité project has done from how your communities have reacted and responded that might inspire people here today?
Sure. Thanks very much. And thank you very much, Search for Common Grounds, first of all, for having me here. And it's been very insightful and interesting to listen to all of your sessions. As for sharing a few key lessons from Sri Lanka, also to show how we have been using technology or social media to hold mainstream media accountable, I can share actually 2 examples really quickly. One of the reasons as to why I am focusing on mainstream media here is because in Sri Lanka and in some other parts of the world as well, it's still mainstream media that is largely consumed in addition to having social media. So there's so much impact that mainstream media is having in a country like Sri Lanka. And we've seen to what extent mainstream media has been racially profiling individuals when they're reporting. For example, you may see that there is media reporting in Sri Lanka where when the individuals are belonging to minority communities, and if they are involved in some sort of, allegedly involved in some sort of antisocial activities, the mainstream media, particularly Sinhala, is very quickly to profile them racially, to say that it's actually a Muslim drug dealer who has been now arrested. And this is something that we also see in Tamil media, for example, towards the Sinhala community as well, but maybe not at the level that we see it in the majority community media, which is Sinhala. So this is something we have problematized using social media. How did we do that? In 2016, after we have been really bothered by the problematic media behavior, we launched what we call Ethics Eye on Facebook. It's a Facebook page that we have been running mainly in Sinhala. And then we are now also functioning mainly on Twitter in English. And we've been educating and empowering the public and journalists alike in terms of media ethical violations and problematic media content. And one of the main areas that we have highlighted was racial profiling, that is having a negative, detrimental impact on coexistence. Because one of the main functions of mainstream media is to really create coexistence. If you do not see coexistence being driven by mainstream media, then there's an issue. And this issue is what we have been raising via Facebook, which has actually brought enormous results, positive results. We are tracking these violations, and we can see a drastic reduction of this specific violation. So while we have seen vulnerable communities, that includes the Tamils and the Muslims who have been racially profiled like this, we have also been flagging problematic content with regard to women, because women are often sexualized, sensationalized, and sex crimes committed against them are also simplified. So these are what we also problematize via Ethics Eye. I will also quickly share one other platform that we have been running. This is also one other example where we have used Twitter in order to hold the mainstream media accountable. So these are some of the examples you could probably think of, apply in your context, because now that social media is so prevalent, so fast, even though mainstream media is so significant in respective countries, you can still use social media in such a way that you can hold individuals and institutions accountable, so that there is better democracy at the end of the day. There is better coexistence. So the other platform that I want to really quickly touch base on is the divide. This is where we show the difference between the Sinhala media and the Tamil media. Let me share an example with you as to why this is such a big issue. Somewhere in 2019, or no, maybe 2018, I can't recall the year exactly, when the army commander in Sri Lanka was appointed, we saw the Sinhala media portraying him as a war hero, as opposed to the Tamil media that portrayed him as a war criminal. Now, these are the polarities that we have seen in Sri Lanka that have been prevalent for such a long time, and polarization has been such a recurrent topic that we saw today, from morning and from yesterday. And this is not something that is unique to Sri Lanka that we can see. This is a problem that India to US to Sri Lanka and to many other countries are facing. And when media is, instead of closing that gap between the communities and bridging that gap between the communities. When they start functioning in different orbits, what happens is that the fractures that we see in the society are further exacerbated, that have, once again, that pose challenges on democracy and social cohesion. So these are some of the issues that we have been discussing, and we are the only ones who have been discussing this in Sri Lanka, using these platforms in order to create social cohesion and then to drive ultimately democracy, because what we are looking at is to have mainstream media to enable democracy than disable democracy. So one of the, if I sum up, I think one of the areas we have to probably focus on is to see how social media and technology can be used as weapons for enabling democracy than disabling democracy.
Thank you very much for very practical examples. And I know from our team in Sri Lanka how highly they regard your work and what a big impact you all are having there. Sahar, so one of the things that struck me from the last night and then today is that in some ways there's a lot of encouragement for peace builders to sometimes think more like the venture tech community in terms of thinking about what really taps into demand and what really can go to scale, not just because it's the way it should be, but it also taps into the way things actually are, right? And on the other hand, trying to encourage people in the tech sector, particularly the builders, to incorporate some of the lessons from the peace building sector, and particularly those that solve real world problems and can even work within the business model of the tech sector. Your institute is probably the primary membership-based institute of the community safety groups from some of the biggest platforms in the tech sector. How much progress are we making? How much hope do you have that we'll be able to see more and more of these insights from the peace building sector actually incorporated within some of even the biggest platforms that you interact with daily?
This is like you're asking me to open the baby pictures of my child and talk about how great it is. I would love to. Thank you for such a softball question.
We can maybe, if we have time, we can load the pictures up on the.
Yeah. So I'm newish to these things. I just want to how long do you want me to take talking about my baby? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? How
Let's start with 3.
All right. Here we go. Forgive me. Who here is really high energy? Just raise your hand. That's great. I'm trying to make this more participatory. Who here is pretty low energy? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to just do a little bit. If you want to thank Lisa for being great of making this happen.
We're going to do all that.
Do me a favor and say, oh, yeah.
We can thank Lisa twice, but we'll start with thanking her once now.
Say, oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you want to thank David J. for making this happen, say, that's right.
That's right.
If you want to thank all the staff who made this happen, say, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
If you want to especially thank the facilities staff and the wait staff, say, you're very cool.
You're very cool.
That's great. Thank you. I had to do that. Another thing I want to do is shout out my man Anamitra for giving me money. Thank you so much for that. It's very good. It's a very important part of my baby's progress is the care and the feeding. Man, there's so much to say. So I feel like part of what you're asking is what is going on, what are we doing, and what's the model? Is that what you're asking? Or is it just
I think that might be the answer that you have, so you should answer that for sure.
I mean, all right. I mean, it's hard to talk about the thing if you don't know what the thing is. So as short as I can make it, there's a type of tech worker. What the tech worker does is work for platforms to protect people from other people on the platform. This goes by many different names: anti-abuse, anti-spam, responsible design, quality, health, integrity, trust and safety, community standards, whatever. We are the constituency organization for those people, and we are a think tank on how to fix the social internet, powered by their unique insights. That's what we do. Okay, so you were asking about, is it working, and how should people feel happy and excited that it's happening?
No, in all seriousness, we're trying to make the case. One of the cases that we're hearing is that, hey, there are these insights from the peacebuilding community about what actually builds social cohesion. And if those insights can be shared with people who are building technology platforms, particularly because some of those insights relate to real problem solving that would that benefit communities and benefit individuals. The insight that was shared earlier, I think, by my friend Lucas, is the difference between the vitamin and the aspirin, right?
Yeah.
And how much of an uptake are you seeing from the community safety folks who are members, from all of the big platforms in your institute, of the uptake, of the interest, of the demand, and even some insights of how those insights actually could be translated? Is it realistic to think that is starting to happen, that could happen at an even greater scale?
I think it could happen. I think some of it is happening, but some deeper work needs to happen first. And so imagine that you have this kind of job. You are stressed. You're working very hard. You don't have much time to think about what the outside world wants to tell you because you are busy bailing out this boat. Everything's flashing red and you are spending 14-hour days trying to just keep things happening and do what's in front of you. And so part of why we exist is to give people a place they can sort of relax and be in the mental space to be able to think about these things. And we talk about ourselves as a bridge from integrity workers to the rest of the world and vice versa. And I think it's happening. And I think that part of it is that there's a power problem. And the power problem is, back when I was at Facebook, a lot of my job was arguing with people that I should be allowed to do my job instead of actually just doing it and writing the code. And I don't think that my story is incredibly unique. And I think that part of what we're doing is coming up with permission structures for people to be allowed to do their jobs at the companies they're at. So writing up best practices so that people can point to those best practices to their people cross-functionally and say, this is the right thing to do, let me do it. So a lot of the stuff we're working on is just forget the rest of the world trying to talk to us. We're just trying to do the very basic, clear out the decks there. That said, I think that there's a lot of cross-pollination to happen, and we're setting up structures to do it. I think that it's kind of weird that there haven't been organizations like this set up 10 years ago, and maybe they have and I just don't know about them. But there is a lot of power in getting people from the same profession in the same place talking about the profession. And right now we're in the burst of enthusiasm phase. And for some people, they've gone past that phase and they're getting into the okay, now it's time to look around and we'd love a digest of what's the most important stuff in the academic literature that came out in the last month. What's the most important stuff that came out of the peacebuilding literature in the last year? Now I finally have time to read it. And when they are ready for that, and if we get enough funding, we'll make it happen. To answer your question, I'm trying.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to meet your baby. Seriously, thank you. Daanish, so you had a chance to speak with us a little bit last night about the perspective from the United Nations, and as you've been here all day, as you've been listening to the insights, when you go back to the UN, this is our primary body for intergovernmental problem solving and keeping the peace. What are some of the primary insights you've picked up from today that you're going to take back?
There are definitely some insights that I've picked up that I'd like to take back, and I'll get to those. I just want to flag also that there's a discussion that I'd like to be having that's not being had here as well. So I'll do both. In terms of some of the insights that I've picked up, I think that the kind of conversation around how do we define social cohesion? What does social cohesion even mean, right? And relatedly, how do we measure social cohesion if we define it, right? And how does that manifest in actual code, right? That's one thing that I've picked up. Another thing I've picked up is when we say we, who are we? Who are we? The ontological question I ask myself every morning. I have a very happy life. But when we say who are we, I mean, are we talking about peace builder communities? Are we talking about tech? Who are we talking about? Are we talking the big companies? Are we talking about the small companies? There are problems here, right? And I guess I will lapse into complaining a little bit. When it comes to some of the big actors, the engagement with the peace builder community feels a little bit like CSR light, CSR circa 2023 maybe, where it's kind of, oh, here's 50,000, here's 100,000, whatever. You say, no. What we're interested in is something different. Can we get engineering resources? That doesn't happen, right? So those are some of the questions that certainly I've picked up on. The other thing that I really love that I keep repeating, is don't focus on content, focus on design. That Tristan just repeated and others repeated, that I think Rabi Ayer said earlier today. But okay, in terms of my dissatisfaction, what are some of the things that I want to be talking about that aren't being talked about in a much more direct way? That we're kind of beating around the bush a little bit. One is that, for more than just analytics, for more than just situational awareness, we talked about analytics, we talked about, how do we analyze hate speech, all this other stuff, but we need to go beyond that, right? I think we need to begin to think about how do we operationalize peace building practices into the development of software, ground up, yeah? Enough of the, we'll take this off the shelf, and somehow we'll work with it, we'll bend over backwards to make it make sense. No. How do we operationalize that? And then the other thing is what I said yesterday. We operate in environments where there are no good commercial reasons for some of these tech actors to be there, right? There are many languages in Kenya. There's so many dialects in Oman, et cetera, et cetera. No one is going to build natural language processing resources, corpora for all those things, right? Us, our community, those who are connected to the, at the grassroots have to do that. So again, how do we do it ground up? Another thing and this is a broader kind of maybe a lifelong mission for me is what does software and tech development from the perspective of indigeneity look like? To quote the notion of indigeneity as defined by scholars like LaDonna Harris, right, the Comanche scholar. How do we center connectedness, embodiment, and embodied connectedness and connectedness to nature in how we develop tech? How do we address the fact that certain senses have been hijacked? The visual sense has been hijacked, right, entirely by technology. But we have other senses. We have other ways of knowing, right? So these things are kind of absent. And then the other thing that was not present in the mainstream of the conference that I had, fortunately, with some brilliant people like Aviv, like Dare, and others that are here, is really the use of large language models in simulating dialogue in conflict contexts, where we can have AI agents that assume the role of different actors or different poles in a conflict and talk to each other to generate what that common language is or what they might agree on over and over again. And that can actually, then you can actually use fast feedback loops. On fast feedback loops, I'll say one last thing. I know I've gone on for too long. And I risk losing you because of my technical mumbo jumbo. But in this, to go back to that old point of engaging with tech actors, getting software developers to talk to us and going ground up, we need faster feedback loops. We need to build stuff from the perspective of peace building and have those practices baked into the writing of software, and we need to iterate faster and faster.
Thanks very much, Daanish. So beautiful. So Tristan, when you hear all of that, and the hearkening back to the design, not the content, and there were no shortage of ideas, and not just ideas, but examples of actually technology being used, and yet I keep coming back to this. We want to generate that hope, and then we've got this looming problem in front of us. So I look at these possibilities, I look at what's already happening, and I'm still struck by the fact that the accumulated reach of all of that. This is literally what sort of keeps me up at night.
The reach of what?
The accumulative reach of all of that, those positive examples that we've heard all day. If you took all of them and you took the cumulative reach of all of them, it reaches less people than YouTube has reached since I started asking this question of you. So I completely agreed with the previous panelist who said, look, you can't just start up. You can't think about scale when you're just starting, because you'll just get you'll become so depressing you won't be able to move. In our work at Search for Common Ground, we always start with, look, the huge societal peace building starts when you're able to connect at the most human level, and then support people to generate cooperation that solves problems. That builds degree of trust that they can connect on ever larger levels, and over time that can generate trust at a level you wouldn't have even imagined when you started. What advice can you give us, or direction can you suggest for us as we take this community forward from here on trying to incentivize that focus on design, practical design, and not content, not give up hope, keep trying? You know, what is it that we need to do in order to generate from here more than just good words, but actually greater and greater momentum, more practical ideas? If we met here this time next year, there would be 20 times more examples given. Maybe one or two things might have really blown up in a positive way. What can you advise or suggest to us? Because you've been thinking about this longer than maybe any of us.
Yeah, I'm hearing the question. So the economic incentives that are driving this system, since in the last, month or so, there's that New York Times article that basically the trust and safety teams have dropped by, I don't even know, thousands and thousands of people. It's bad. When I talked to Frances Haugen about this, she had said that the varsity team, this is before they let go of so many of these employees, the varsity team, so let me put it this way, there's this brain implant in the mind of humanity. Like Elon Musk can actually close down Neuralink, the brain implant company that he has, because we actually already built a brain implant in the mind of humanity, and it's called social media. And the electrodes are left out, and so anybody like Russia or China or bad actors can tweak it. And there's this economic incentive for the brain implant that it doesn't just want to help you. It has this incentive, as we know from engagement, to design it and to steer your thoughts and thought patterns towards these things that are not the ones that are in fiduciary interest of your best developmental interest. What would be good for the society? What would be good for a child? Would be good for a teenager or a mother or someone who's a peace builder. And so long as those economic incentives exist in that way, it's hard to change that system. And the way that Frances Haugen described the trust and safety teams and the group that Sahar has formed, Integrity Institute, I'm so happy that it exists, and I'm so happy that that it's gathering the people that do this work, and they do need so much support. What I worry about is the way that the economic incentives want to let go of more and more of those people over time, right? And I think you have to look at the economic incentives if you want to address this problem. Because otherwise we're just going uphill. And then there's this challenge of, do I want to reform the incumbent platforms, or do I want us to say, screw it, can we just shut them down, and can we build the better things from the ground up with the perspectives that were missing from the beginning, with the different senses that have been missing from what does it mean to design in a humane way, including at a somatic level? Should people be on technology as long as they're on? Could Apple be incentivized to design technology in a way that is not about an individual on the screen, but we just interviewed for our podcast recently one of the people at Sesame Street, because Sesame Street is actually a really interesting example, the kids show, if that's to remember, interesting example of designing directly for the developmental benefit of children. And you were designing not for an individual child there sitting and learning a lesson, but for also the child and the parent to watch together, so that they're actually forming a relationship, rather than I'm just designing for this maximized screen time thing. And those kinds of design choices, of I'm designing for a family, not for an individual user who's commoditizing a dead slab of human attention to just run on the assembly line. Those are the kinds of design choices that we all want to see. I think it cut out. Those are the kind of design choices that we all want to see. We want to see a total world of humane design choices. And to do that, we have to actually establish a new economic incentive for how these things work. And we all know the uncomfortable fact that the advertising-based paradigm is the most profitable paradigm for these platforms. And if you're a new platform that comes along and says, I don't want to do advertising, you're going to lose to the platforms that do come along that do advertising, because they're going to grow more resources faster, get more venture capital, and so on. Now, I'm not saying this because I want to dissuade us or make us feel sad or down.
When you and I started this conversation almost 2 years ago, right? I didn't. I said, for my peace building friends in the room and online, I think the first things I said to you in that first phone call was, the last thing I want to do is help establish another venue about peace building and tech where nobody but peace builders shows up. And I love peace builders. I spend my life with them. And one of the things about peace building that's really powerful is you find peace builders in all different kinds of professions. So part of the insight was, well, there are natural peace builders, I'm sure, in the tech sector, or people who, if they had an understanding of what peace building is, would actually really be drawn to it and be very powerful to them. If we could establish some sort of account. So I feel like we're at this very early stage, and I don't know for you how unique this kind of gathering is. For me, this is totally unique, and we have been to so many gatherings, and it took a long time to build up even to just this. So my intention in asking this question is not to put a damper of the economic model about all this. I think I hear you, but it is how do we take this flame that has just started, that I feel this is quite special, you know, when I sit here today. Really, even all of it, even that, David. And how do we, you know, you take what Lisa Shirk pulled together for us here of this roadmap for collaboration on technology and social cohesion. I hope if you take one thing away from here, you take this and you take a look at the 10 things on the back. You know, this is the roadmap that we have in mind. There's got to be this all comes out of a lot of work. How can where should we focus our efforts in this area so that we build this into something more than not just the same conversation with this group of people next year, but perhaps this group of people and even many more with an even deeper, more powerful conversation with more examples? Where should we focus our energy? Because I don't think some of it needs to be focused on the ringing the alarm. It still needs to have, but again, tearing down the old is not the same as building the new. What's the best way for us to invest in building the new? And I'm going to come to the rest of the panel, but I know, we started this conversation a couple years ago. I don't want to leave today in front of everybody without really trying to drill down into this.
I want to let other people speak here, but we've often thought of the work that there needs to be 3 different pressure points, and I see this group being the 3rd pressure point. The first pressure point is external pressure. How do we dial up the congressional hearings? How do we dial up Frances Haugens? How do we dial up whistleblowers? How do we dial up attorneys general, just like with big tobacco, suing the business model so that categorically, the thing that should happen is that categorically, just like with big tobacco, where 50 states basically sued tobacco companies and said that you've built a toxic product that gives people cancer, I think that if we classify the engagement-based business model as a categorical cancer to society, that we ban and outlaw it because we recognize that it has pernicious and toxic effects, that would be the kind of thing that I would like to see happen on the external pressure side. The internal pressure side is that there's got to be people like trust and safety teams that are empowered instead of disempowered. We have to have people, whistleblowers, that can actually raise the concerns. There has to be transparency so we can see what's going on in the platform, so it's not hidden in the dark and we don't know what's happening in Sri Lanka, even though the people on the inside who are doing the queries on Sri Lanka every day might know that there's all this horrible stuff happening. But then the last leg that is the one that excites me about this group and this audience is aspirational pressure. People have to see that there's a different way that this stuff can work. And the problem is that, of course, we all know those different aspirational ways that it could work won't get adopted and become the new basis of how it works until the other pressures are also there. But we also need that aspirational pressure to show and prove that there's a different way. That's why I'm personally excited about these design pattern libraries that show there's a different way, highlighting the work that that Colin's doing with Polis and BridgeRank from Aviv and those who are working on alternative models. Because then, as the external pressure and the internal pressure increases, you could say, hey, Congress, it's time for these platforms to move from being an engagement-based toxic cancer on society. We have to basically pass the Tech Fiduciary Act that basically says you can no longer optimize for engagement. You have to, if you're building something that affects culture and the information commons, you have to maximize for, let's say, BridgeRank. And BridgeRank would mean how quickly, as fast as Facebook and Twitter can make you lonely, depressed, scared, and fearful, if everybody was seeing synthesis-based, good faith conversation, where people are listening to each other and doing turn-taking, if that was the media environment that you were watching and consuming every single day, I'm not saying that solves all these problems. I'm not a techno-utopian. You all know that. But how quickly could culture change if that was the default? So that's the kind of thing that I would like to see happen. And there's actually different things that all these people in this room can do to make that happen, including, I see America in one room over there. What if we ran civic deliberations saying, hey, actually, let's get a representative sample of people across the country together to actually deliberate for as long as it takes, not some quick 8-minute TV spot where we say we don't like social media or we're upset with this content moderation decision, but here's a structural problem. and you get them to deliberate with the best researchers sitting in front of them, just like James Fishkin's work at Stanford on deliberative polling. For those who don't know, American One Room was a project where they get basically a representative sample of citizens to come together and debate contentious topics, and then come to an actual like 85% approval of this is the thing we'd like to happen. I've been in rooms where I've seen that parents would love to live in a world, China does this, where social media goes dark from 10 p.m. to 6 in the morning, because then all kids don't have to deal with it. It just lights out. And literally, if you open up the app, it's just gone. And if you got 12 parents together to say, what do we want to do with social media? Just that one change. And then Apple sees, 85% of citizens want to see that happen. So then they just say, we're going to pass that in the App Store. But the downward spiral we're in is so long as culture is this funhouse mirror of fragments and disagreement, and everybody is mistrusting of if Apple did something like that, we'd say they're this authoritarian country and now we're on the way to Stalinism or something like that. People wouldn't trust those kinds of decisions. So we need legitimacy creating processes like deliberative polling, like what American One Room is doing. We need alternative designs like what Colin is doing to help power those kinds of processes. We need Integrity Institute to help raise the alarm to see how, hey, the trust and safety teams are not supported. So we need all these things together to get to that world. But you have to have all legs of the stool. And I'd like to see this community be 10 times as big, I don't know if a year from now, but a couple years from now. And I'd like to see many more of those design patterns really filled out so that people have a visceral idea that a different world is possible.
Thank you. So I love the I love that phrase of aspirational pressure as perhaps the theme for what this community uniquely could bring to this. And I'm going to ask each of you as a final question, and Deepanjalie, I'll start with you. So when you see these two communities, you can do it whether where you're seeing it in Sri Lanka or where you see it globally in the research that you're doing. But when you see these two communities coming together, what to you would be the best way, the best area of focus, or the best way for them to bring that aspirational pressure? What kind of collaboration would you like to see? What kind of support would you like to see?
Yeah, I think one of the main drivers of support for them to come together will be, in my context, it's media. And it includes both mainstream and social media. And one of the ways where we see social media being discredited and delegitimized, at least in our parts of the world mostly, is to say that it has been weaponized, it has been used in such a way to really give rise to communal violence, etc. But we are coming from a context, like Gehan pointed out in the morning, is a very repressive environment where a mainstream media is increasingly co-opted. So in such an atmosphere, all we have to do is to turn to social media. And where we have to really focus on bringing these communities together is by focusing on both mainstream media and social media, because we can't let go of one group of the other, as we are depending on both of these in the local context. So I'm not too sure whether it is both for certain other countries' context, but one group that I want to highlight is that. The second one is, once again, technology. When I say technology, I think we have to really look at decreasing this divide between the global north and the global south. Why I'm saying this is because if you look at the way how some of the social media regulations that have been introduced in countries like Germany are pitched in Sri Lanka, that is to say that actually we see a lot of legitimacy created for social media regulation in Sri Lanka by referring to these legislations that have been introduced in countries such as Germany. So the excuse is that if Germany can implement these, why not Sri Lanka? And there we are trapped because, one, social media is the way where we actually are able to hold the mainstream media accountable, as it is increasingly co-opted. And then when the government comes to, the state comes to intervene in the space of social media by using those excuses for their own advantage, then those people who are actually aspiring for democracy are in great crisis. So for us, it's social media, mainstream media, and also for us to be able to say that well it is actually repressive laws that are going to be recommended in countries like Sri Lanka, and for global north, for example, also to be mindful of the fact that the level of engagement countries like us have with the state is quite different from the way the global north has. So I think being mindful of those distinctions is what I think is important.
Thank you very much. I think these are critical insights, and sometimes when we talk about regulatory reform, these insights are really lacking when you don't have voices expressing how this plays out in much of the global south in particular. So thank you. I'm going to go, I want to come to high energy last. So Daanish, let me go to you next on this, just from an institutional, I feel like we're close friends already.
I cede my time to Sahar. I'm kidding.
From an,
Rebellion on the panel.
again, from an institutional perspective, from the UN, if you were to look at this particular community, the uniqueness of this community that's just forming here this weekend, what, from your perspective, is the highest priority direction that you'd like to see it move in?
Ooh, no pressure. I would say that what I said earlier, I think, is, for me, is the most important thing, right? So to kind of, shift tack a little bit and kind of begin to think about, from the vast amount of information and wisdom that we've gathered from our practices of working at the grassroots, at different levels, working on peace building, working on intergroup dynamics, what insights can be deployed in terms of what we optimize for and how we design, right? In software, in platforms for dialogue, in immersive environments. Just as an example, one of the projects we're working on now is designing an immersive environment in which dialogue, mediation, conflict negotiation can take place. What are the key design elements of that? What kind of insights from intergroup neuroscience research that have been validated in a lab or clinical setting can be applied or be ecologically validated in this immersive VR environment where we want dialogue to take place? I'm just citing this as an example, right? So those are the kind of questions I'd like to be asking, on a range of technologies, not just text-based dialogue, not just chat, but all kinds of technologies. And I'd like for us to think big, because I think that if we keep talking about the existing frame, we're stuck with that frame. That's still our reference frame. How about we break out of that reference frame? Because, we come from much more wealth of wisdom and knowledge, right? And we have the power and the insight to know that there's a problem with this hierarchy of knowledge, where we prioritize certain forms of knowledge over others. We have access. We can learn from communities. We have access to indigenous communities, let's say in DRC, who have their existing practices around peace building that have been used for centuries, right? That we completely disregard. Instead, we parachute in holding a copy of The Economist and a McKinsey report, right? Which is terrible, right? But my point is, how do we listen to that and we say, okay, this works here. What would that look like in code? That's my challenge to us.
Thank you, Daanish. Wonderful. Sahar, I'll end with you. What direction would you most like to see this go in this particular community?
Is Arik in the room? Yeah, so first we fight, and then we figure out what we have in common. And here's some context. I talked to Lisa, and I said, what am I doing on the stage? And she said, your job is to pay attention to every panel, take notes, and be the bad boy of the conference who says, your cranky truths. So
she should have warned me.
Yeah.
The moderator. Anyway.
So in the vein of a little bit of the fight, I think that there are myths that I heard today, small ones, that I don't think are true. And I think the best thing that we can do in this room is actually talk to each other in like small groups on those tables that was set up. That was really cool. And, at any conference, the best conversations are in the hallways. And I think a lot of one-on-one conversations, getting to know people is very important. Since I'm on stage, here are some truths, as far as I can see them, that I think are important for us to keep in mind to move forward. And then we'll talk about moving forward. The first is, tech workers are not tech CEOs. The way we think is different. They are not us. Please do not lump us in with our bosses. The second thing is, tech workers are not just engineers, right? Journalists have worked with me on integrity teams. I think of Devra, who was a professor at UPenn and gave that up to work on helping people to vote. We have content strategists, we have designers, we have community organizers, we have people from many walks of life. It's not just engineers. Next myth. A thing to pay attention to is that tech companies are powerful, but they're also easily bullied. And a thing that I pay attention to is how actually these really powerful big tech companies are bullied by, the Indian government, by the Turkish government, by the American government all the time, by media demagogues, by their advertisers, by media pressure on the Anglosphere press. They are bullied all the time, and they make bad decisions because they are weak sometimes, as well as making bad decisions because they are strong. Another thing about it is that, I personally don't like the term trust and safety, and I think partly because, as someone said, should these institutions be trusted? Should the main goal be keeping people safe? I'm not sure that's true. And I think that part of the frame of what we're talking about is, as Ravi pointed out, as you all pointed out, it's about design. It's about thinking about the macroeconomics of what happens, of content creators who want to get views, and that's the supply. There's a demand for bad content. How do we intermediate between the supply and demand? How do we think about taxes on views? There's a whole way of thinking about quality, and there's a whole sort of emerging discipline, which is much more than we have to take down harms. And it's important just, I think, to acknowledge that. And another thing I think that is a myth that I've been hearing that I want to address is often, and I'm going to shout out some of my members over there, people at especially the large companies, especially on integrity teams, have thought about a lot of this stuff and have tried it. And maybe the problem wasn't that they didn't have the idea, but the problem was they weren't allowed to do it, or they tried it and it didn't work. And relatedly, I think I flubbed on the last question you asked me. They're here. A lot of my members are here in this room right now. A lot of people who qualify to be members but are not members yet, integrityinstitute.org/membership, are here. And again, they're part of the conversation because integrity workers come from many different parts of life. That's one of the cool things about it. In terms of what we do next, I've heard a lot about, can we beg the big monopolistic platforms to do the thing we want them to do? And I've heard a lot about, we have this tiny little app, can we beg users to use it, please? And both of those sound really hard. And I think talking about power and monopolization and all that is important. And we're talking about incentives of companies and why they do what they do. And there's this thing that I call the civic tech problem, which is if you have a civic tech app, the people who will use your app are precisely people who do not need to use your app. And I see a lot of that in the world. So because I'm trying to be brief, my last bucket of ideas that I'll go into is, why are we here? Are we here to show off for funders about how smart and interesting we are? Because I would love to do that, but that can't be the whole point of the conference. And are we here to sort of talk about how cool we are in general? That's not it. Are we here to learn from each other? Probably, but one thing that I've seen over and over in the last few days is so there's so many ideas, but actually implementation is really important. Implementation isn't just engineering. It's also getting Twitter to adopt your bridging algorithm. It's getting, a funder to believe in you. It's getting, the UN or whoever to take up your specific project as opposed to someone else's project. Sales and marketing are part of implementation, and it all takes resources. And I'm just would love for us to think about each of us in the one-on-one conversations we're having, what resources do I have in abundance? What resources do I need? And how can we swap? And the great thing about this conference, unlike almost every other conference I've been in my entire life, is that it has a goal, which is the thing that's happening tomorrow, where I think that's going to happen. And so I think the place that we need to move forward is people showing up, wanting to collaborate, but collaborating from a space of, let's be very clear that part of what we're doing is a dance for funding. Part of what we're doing is talking a big game about resources that we don't have, but we hope to have if this thing closes. And that's fine, but let's be very clear about what we have, what we need, and none of us are dancing monkeys who are here to, like, you know, talk about one idea. We're full human beings who have a rich set of thoughts. And just because, you know, let's say Aviv is the bridging guy and the deliberative democracy guy, doesn't mean that Aviv doesn't have lots of other ideas about other things. And that's important to remember too. That's probably enough. Thanks for asking.
Your second child is just as beautiful, by the way. That was great. So listen, I want to thank, just to me personally, I'm a very hopeful person, genetically hopeful almost. And this is the space that I've struggled the most to maintain hope. So I want to first thank every member of this panel and the rest of the speakers today for the hope that you've generated in me. And I want to give a hand to these panelists in particular for ending the day so powerfully. And the last thing I want to do, so you made, Sahar, the very good point that the best conversations happen in the hallway. So we're going to spend some good time at the reception in the hallway right after this. But before we go out there, there are just a few people to thank who got us here today, who organized this whole thing. I first want to give special thanks. We had a lot of partners. I want to thank all of the sponsors, but particularly over the last couple of months in really pulling this together. Tristan, all of your colleagues at the Center for Humane Technology. The crew at More in Common, I don't know if you're still here in the room, but thank you very much. The Civic Health Project. And then I have three Search for Common Ground colleagues that I have to thank: Amanda Feldman, Yubakar Rajkarnikar, and Veronica Golianova. Thank you all so much. I want to thank Prithvi Iyer and all the Notre Dame students and the person who brought them and so many of us here today, Lisa Shirk. And I had to leave one Search for Common Ground colleague to the end because he was our fantastic, motivating, energizing MC, Christian Chirgiri. Where are you? Thank you so much. All right. Thank you all so much. Join us in the reception. Are you waiting for this? Nope. All right. Thanks. I'll see you at the reception.